Welcome to this week's edition of True Footballing Icons. Over the last 7 days, we've traveled across football history to revisit the lives of some of the game's most unforgettable legends. From the passion of Kevin Keegan, football's first rock star, to the heartbreaking story of Adriano, the emperor who seemed destined to rule the game forever. From the streets of Buenos Aires with Diego Maradona, to players who inspired cities, carried nations, and created moments that will live forever in football history. These are the stories behind the trophies. The moments behind the headlines. The memories that made millions fall in love with football. So sit back, relax, and relive the careers of the footballing icons we featured this week. Long before footballers became global celebrities, Kevin Keegan already looked like a rock star. The perm, the energy, the swagger. Everything about Kevin Keegan felt larger than football itself. But what truly made Keegan unforgettable was emotion. Because Kevin Keegan did not simply play football. He made supporters feel alive. Born in Doncaster, England, in 1951, Keegan did not begin his career as a global superstar. In fact, many doubted whether he was physically gifted enough to succeed at the highest level. He was not the tallest, not the strongest. But Kevin Keegan possessed something impossible to measure: relentless belief. And once he arrived at Liverpool, under legendary manager Bill Shankly, everything changed. Liverpool during the 1970s became one of football's great dynasties. Aggressive, fearless, relentless. And Kevin Keegan became the emotional heartbeat of the team. He played football with visible passion. Every sprint looked desperate. Every goal looked personal. Every celebration felt explosive. Supporters connected to that instantly, because Keegan never looked detached from the game. He looked emotionally consumed by it. At Liverpool, Keegan won 3 First Division titles, 2 UEFA Cups, and the FA Cup. And alongside players like Ian Callaghan and John Tushack, Liverpool conquered Europe. Yet even among great players, Keegan stood apart. Because football fans saw themselves in him. He did not play like somebody untouched by pressure. He played like somebody feeling every second of it. That emotional connection made him one of football's first true superstars. By the late 1970s, Kevin Keegan was everywhere. Magazine covers, advertisements, television appearances. The perm became iconic. And long before modern football branding existed, Keegan had already become football's first celebrity footballer. Then came Germany. When Keegan joined Hamburger SV in 1977, many English supporters were shocked. English footballers rarely left England during that era. But Keegan embraced the challenge. And once again, he succeeded. In Germany, Keegan transformed himself from English star into world football icon. He won 2 Ballon d'Or awards, Bundesliga title, European Cup final appearance only beaten by Nottingham Forest managed by Brian Clough. And across Europe, supporters fell in love with his energy and determination. Former teammate Franz Beckenbauer once admired Keegan's incredible work ethic and intensity. Because no matter the pressure, Keegan never stopped running, never stopped believing. And perhaps that became the defining image of his entire football life. Not perfection, effort, emotion, fight. For England, Keegan became captain and national icon. But international tournaments often brought frustration rather than glory. And somehow, that almost made supporters love him more. Because Kevin Keegan never felt distant. He felt human. You could see the pressure on his face, the passion in his celebrations, the disappointment in defeat. Football supporters recognized authenticity in him. And authenticity creates emotional connection. After retirement, Keegan eventually returned to football management. And once again, emotion followed him everywhere. Nowhere more than at Newcastle United. During the 1990s, Keegan transformed Newcastle into the entertainers. They attacked fearlessly, played with chaos, scored constantly, and made supporters dream again. St. James's Park became electric. Black and white scarves filled the sky. Hope returned to Newcastle. And Kevin Keegan stood on the touchline living every second emotionally. But Kevin Keegan's emotional connection with football did not end at Newcastle. In 1999, he became manager of England national football team. For a man who had once carried the hopes of England as captain, the pressure returned once again. Managing England is different from managing a football club. Every decision becomes national debate. Every defeat feels personal. And once again, Keegan carried that emotional weight visibly. Although his time as England manager was difficult, supporters still recognized the passion he brought to the role. Because Kevin Keegan never knew how to give football anything less than everything. Throughout his managerial career, Keegan also managed Fulham and Manchester City. And wherever he went, one thing always followed him: emotion. His teams attacked bravely, played fearlessly, and reflected his personality completely. Because Kevin Keegan never wanted football to feel cautious. He wanted football to feel alive. And the moment football will never forget. I would love it if we beat them. Love it. The famous press conference became one of English football's defining images. But beneath the memes and modern jokes, there was something tragic about it. Because that speech was not really about rivalry. It was pressure, passion, exhaustion. A man carrying the hopes of an entire city. And perhaps that moment perfectly captured Kevin Keegan himself. Emotional, passionate, consumed by football. Some footballers are remembered for statistics, others for trophies. Kevin Keegan is remembered for feeling. Across his career, he scored over 200 goals, won football's biggest honours, and became one of England's most beloved figures. But more importantly, he made football feel alive. That is why Kevin Keegan will always remain a true footballing icon. Not simply because he won, but because he made supporters believe. What is your favourite memory of Kevin Keegan? At his peak, Adriano looked unstoppable, powerful, explosive, terrifying. For a few years, football believed it was watching the next great Brazilian superstar. Then slowly, football watched him disappear. Known around the world as the Emperor, Adriano became one of the most feared strikers of the 2000s. Not because of tricks, not because of flair, but because every time he struck the ball, it looked violent. Goalkeepers feared him. Defenders backed away from him. And supporters believed almost anything was possible when Adriano charged toward goal. Born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in 1982, Adriano grew up surrounded by poverty and hardship. Football became escape, hope, opportunity, and from an early age, his talent looked frightening. Tall, powerful, left-footed. He looked built to dominate football physically. But behind the strength was a quiet personality. A young man deeply connected to family and home. After rising through Clube de Regatas do Flamengo, Adriano moved to Italy while still a teenager. Eventually, he arrived at Inter Milan. And that is where the Emperor was born. Italian football during the early 2000s was filled with legendary defenders. Yet Adriano bullied them. He scored with thunderous long shots, explosive runs, and shooting from impossible angles with brutal power. At times, he looked less like a footballer, and more like a force of nature. Former teammate Zlatan Ibrahimovic once admitted Adriano had abilities few players in history possessed. Because physically, he seemed unstoppable. At Inter, Adriano became one of world football's biggest stars. The San Siro roared every time he touched the ball. Supporters believed they were watching football's next dominant striker. For Brazil, he looked equally unstoppable. Alongside players like Ronaldinho, Kaká, and Ronaldo, Brazil possessed terrifying attacking talent. and Adriano often stood at the center of it. At the 2004 Copa America, Adriano became the tournament's top scorer and helped Brazil win the competition dramatically. Then came the goal against Argentina. Deep into stoppage time. Power. Chaos. Emotion. Moments like that made supporters believe Adriano could become football's next global superstar. But behind the goals, something darker had already begun. In 2004, Adriano received devastating news. His father had died suddenly, and according to many close to him, Adriano never truly recovered emotionally. The smile faded. The energy changed. Football no longer looked joyful. Former Inter president Massimo Moratti once admitted Adriano's decline felt deeply painful for everybody at the club, because they loved him beyond football. Supporters could see the sadness growing. The absences increased. The performances changed. And slowly, football stopped seeing the emperor. Instead, they saw a young man struggling emotionally in front of the world. That is what makes Adriano's story feel different from many football declines. It was not laziness. It was grief. And grief does not disappear because somebody is famous. Despite moments of brilliance returning occasionally, Adriano never truly looked the same again. The power remained, but the joy disappeared. Eventually, Adriano drifted away from Europe and returned to Brazil. And football supporters around the world watched sadly as one of the game's most terrifying talents slowly faded away. Yet even today, Adriano remains loved. Because supporters remember the feeling he created. The power. The excitement. The fear defenders felt. But they also remember the humanity. The vulnerability. The sadness behind the superstar. Some footballers are remembered because they fulfilled their destiny. Adriano is remembered because football never stopped wondering what might have been. Across his career, he won league titles, represented Brazil at the highest level, and became one of the most feared forwards of his generation. But more importantly, he reminded football supporters that even superheroes can break. That is why Adriano will always remain a true footballing icon. Not simply because of the goals, but because football never stopped missing the emperor. What is your favorite memory of Adriano? Some strikers score goals. Some strikers terrify defenders. But very few leave behind a legacy powerful enough to become immortal to an entire city. Gabriel Batistuta did exactly that. To football fans around the world, Batistuta was more than a goalscorer. He was power, passion, intensity, a warrior wearing number 9. And in Florence, he became a king. Known as Batigol, Gabriel Batistuta became one of the deadliest strikers football had ever seen. Not because of tricks, not because of flair, but because every time he shot, it felt like he was trying to destroy the net itself. Born in Reconquista, Argentina, on February 1, 1969, Batistuta did not grow up dreaming of football superstardom. As a young boy, basketball interested him more. But once he committed fully to football, his rise became unstoppable. Batistuta possessed something impossible to teach. Instinct. The ability to appear in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. Combined with explosive power, aggression, aerial ability, and ruthless finishing, he became every defender's nightmare. After impressing in Argentina with clubs including CA River Plate and Boca Juniors, Batistuta moved to Italy in 1991. And that is where football mythology truly began. At ACF Fiorentina, Batistuta found something deeper than success. He found love. The supporters adored him instantly, because Batistuta played football with visible passion. Every sprint looked furious. Every goal looked emotional. Every celebration felt personal. Fans quickly gave him the nickname Batigol. And soon, all of Italy feared him. Former defender Paolo Maldini once admitted, "Batistuta was one of the toughest strikers I ever faced." And defenders had good reason to fear him. Batistuta could score from anywhere. Long-range rockets, headers, volleys, and free kicks from impossible angles. When he struck the ball cleanly, goalkeepers barely had time to react. One of the most important parts of Batistuta's story came in 1993. Fiorentina were relegated from SerieA. For many superstars, leaving would have been automatic. But Batistuta stayed. That loyalty transformed him from great footballer into club legend. He helped Fiorentina fight back into SerieA and remained loyal during the prime years of his career despite interest from Europe's biggest clubs. That loyalty meant everything to Florence. And perhaps that is why Batistuta's story still feels emotional decades later. Because football fans remember players who stay. During the 1994-95 season, Batistuta scored in 11 consecutive SerieA matches, a league record at the time. Every weekend seemed to produce another thunderous goal. Another explosion from the crowd. Another moment of Batigol madness. At international level, Batistuta became one of Argentina's greatest ever forwards. For Argentina, he scored 56 goals in 78 appearances and starred at multiple FIFA World Cups. His hat-tricks at the 1994 and 1998 World Cups confirmed his place among football's elite strikers. And yet, despite all the goals, one image perhaps defines him more than any other. In 2000, Batistuta finally left Fiorentina for AS Roma. The move broke hearts in Florence. But Batistuta had one dream left: to win Serie A. And in 2001, he achieved it. Batistuta helped Roma become champions of Italy, finally lifting the Scudetto after years of near misses. Yet even while celebrating, many Fiorentina supporters still loved him. Because they understood. He had given them everything. Across his career, Batistuta scored more than 350 goals and became one of the greatest strikers of his generation. But statistics alone never captured the emotion he created. Batistuta played football with fury, with pride, with visible hunger. Former teammate Francesco Totti once described him as a complete striker. And many football fans would agree. Even years after retirement, Batistuta's body still carried the pain of the way he played. He once admitted the damage to his ankles became so severe he struggled to walk properly after football. That revelation somehow made supporters admire him even more, because it proved how much of himself he gave to the game. That is why Batistuta will always be remembered as a true footballing icon. Not just because of the goals. Not just because of the trophies. But because he played football like a warrior and gave supporters moments they would never forget. Let us know in the comments. What's your favorite memory or goal of Gabriel Batistuta? Some footballers win matches. Some footballers win trophies. But very few change the identity of an entire football club. Eric Cantona did exactly that. To Manchester United supporters, Cantona was not simply a player. He was a revolution. A leader. A genius. A symbol of confidence. And eventually, a king. Known around the world as King Eric, Cantona became one of football's most charismatic and unforgettable figures. Not because he followed the rules, but because he seemed completely different from everybody else. Born on May 24, 1966, in Marseille, France, Cantona grew up with passion, attitude, and fierce confidence. Even as a young player, he possessed extraordinary technical ability. But alongside the talent came controversy. Eric's temper regularly created headlines throughout his early career in France. Arguments with managers. Suspensions. Disciplinary problems. At times, it seemed his own personality might destroy his football career before it fully began. Yet beneath the chaos was genius. He could score spectacular goals, create impossible passes, dominate matches, emotionally inspire teammates, and perhaps most importantly, he carried himself like he believed he belonged above everyone else on the pitch. After spells with clubs including Olympique de Marseille, Nîmes Olympique, and others in France, Cantona moved to English football in 1992. First with Leeds United. The impact was immediate. Leeds won the First Division title. But soon, one of football's most important transfers changed English football forever. Manchester United signed Eric Cantona. At the time, United were talented but inconsistent. Sir Alex Ferguson had built a young side full of potential. Ryan Giggs, Paul Ince, Mark Hughes, later Beckham, Scholes, and Neville. But Eric gave them belief. Former teammate Ryan Giggs once said, "He taught us how to win." That influence changed Manchester United forever. He brought arrogance, calmness, leadership, swagger. He played with his collar raised high, walking across pitches with an almost theatrical confidence. And Old Trafford adored him instantly. Fans began singing. Multiple musical notes, "Où are Cantona?" Multiple musical notes. The chant became immortal, and is still sung at every game. At Manchester United, Cantona won Trophy 4 Premier League titles in 5 seasons, Trophy 2 FA Cups and Trophy multiple individual awards. He scored over 80 goals for the club and produced countless iconic moments. But statistics alone can never explain Eric Cantona, because Eric felt larger than football. One famous quote perfectly captured his mysterious personality. After his infamous kung fu kick incident against a Crystal Palace supporter in 1995, Cantona appeared before the media and said, "When the seagulls follow the trawler, it is because they think sardines will be thrown into the sea." Then he walked away. The quote became football mythology. The kung fu kick itself remains one of football's most shocking moments. After reacting to abuse from a fan, Cantona launched himself into the crowd with a flying kick. The image spread around the world instantly. He was suspended for months. Many believed his Manchester United career was over. But Sir Alex Ferguson stood by him. And when he returned like a king reclaiming his throne. In the 1995-96 season, Eric inspired United to another league and FA Cup double. His winning goal in the FA Cup final against Liverpool became one of English football's defining images. Collar raised. Calm expression. The captain of Manchester United. Former teammate David Beckham once admitted, "He was our leader, our hero." And perhaps no player influenced Manchester United's culture more before the rise of the treble-winning side. Eric gave the club attitude, belief, fearlessness. Across his professional career, Eric Cantona scored more than 200 goals and won league titles in both France and England. For France, he earned 45 international caps and scored 20 goals, often captaining his country during the early 1990s. But despite his brilliance, Cantona never played at a World Cup, which somehow makes his story feel even more mythical. Because his legacy was built not on international glory, but on personality, aura, presence. In 1997, at just 30 years old, Eric Cantona shocked football by retiring suddenly. Many supporters could barely believe it. He walked away while still one of the most influential footballers in Europe, almost like a movie character disappearing at the perfect ending. And perhaps that suited him perfectly, because Eric Cantona never felt entirely real. He felt larger than life. That is why he will always be remembered as a true footballing icon, especially to me. Not just because of the trophies. Not just because of the goals. But because he transformed belief into greatness and made football feel theatrical, emotional, and unforgettable. Let us know in the comments. Was King Eric the most important footballer of all time for Manchester United? Some footballers become legends through longevity. Others become immortal because football never stopped imagining what they could have been. Marco van Basten belongs to the second group. To many supporters, Van Basten was not simply a striker. He was elegance. Movement without effort. Finishing without panic. Watching Marco van Basten often felt less like sport, and more like art. Born in Utrecht, Netherlands, on October 31st, 1964, Van Basten looked destined for football greatness from the very beginning. Tall. Graceful. Technically flawless. Even as a young player, he moved differently. Calmer than everyone around him. As though football slowed down when the ball reached his feet. At Ajax, Van Basten quickly became the next great Dutch football talent. And replacing the legacy of Johan Cruyff at Ajax was never supposed to be easy. But Van Basten never tried to imitate Cruyff. He created his own identity. A striker capable of impossible volleys, delicate finishes, acrobatic goals. He could do everything. And somehow, all of it looked effortless. Former teammate Ruud Gullit once called him the perfect striker. And for many football fans, that description still feels accurate. At Ajax, Van Basten scored goals at a frightening rate. Season after season, defenders struggled to understand him. Because he could destroy teams beautifully. He did not overpower football. He mastered it. Then came Italy. In 1987, Van Basten joined AC Milan alongside fellow Dutch stars Ruud Gullit and later Frank Rijkaard. Together, they helped create one of the greatest club sides football has ever seen. Under legendary manager Arrigo Sacchi, Milan became relentless. And Van Basten stood at the center of it all. Football in Italy during that era was brutal. Defenders kicked relentlessly. Space barely existed. Every touch came under pressure. Yet Van Basten still made the game feel graceful. He won 3 Ballon d'Or awards, 2 European Cups, 3 SerieA titles. But statistics still fail to do him justice or explain what made him special. Because Marco van Basten made difficult football look natural. His brilliance was not built on power alone. It was intelligence. A movement half a second earlier than the defender expected. A finish placed before the goalkeeper had even reacted. Football seemed slower around him. That was the difference. Paolo Maldini once said that training against Van Basten felt almost impossible. Because he could beat defenders without even touching the ball. He understood space in ways most players never could. And yet, despite the elegance, there was always something ruthless about him. Van Basten rarely celebrated wildly. He usually looked calm. Cold almost. Like scoring impossible goals was simply expected of him. That quiet confidence became part of his aura. Then came the moment that defined him forever. Euro 1988. The Netherlands against the Soviet Union in the final. As the ball dropped from the sky, Van Basten struck a volley from an angle so impossible that most players would not even attempt it. The ball flew across goal and into the net. Silence for a split second. Then disbelief. For many supporters, it remains the greatest goal in European Championship history. Even now, decades later, the goal still feels unreal. Almost impossible. And perhaps no single moment captures Van Basten better. Beauty mixed with perfection. The Netherlands became European champions. And Marco van Basten became football royalty. But while the world admired the elegance, his body was already beginning to break. The tackles, the pressure, the violence of defending in that era. Slowly, football was taking pieces away from him. By the early 1990s, the pain in his ankles had become constant. Training sessions became difficult. Matches became recovery battles. Still, Van Basten kept trying to return. Because greatness rarely lets go quietly. There is something uniquely sad about footballers whose bodies betray them before their talent fades. Because the genius remains. But the body no longer allows it to exist. At just 28 years old, Marco van Basten effectively played his final match. A football career that should have dominated an entire generation ended almost before it truly finished. Many supporters still believe football lost something special that day. Because Van Basten never looked replaceable. He looked unique. Former manager Arrigo Sacchi once said, "Marco was elegance and intelligence combined." And perhaps that is why his story still feels emotional decades later. Not because he failed, but because football never got to see the full story. Across his career, Van Basten scored more than 300 goals for club and country and became one of the most naturally gifted forwards the game has ever produced. Yet many fans remember him with sadness as much as admiration. Because his story became football's greatest what if. What if the injuries never came? What if his prime lasted another 7 or 8 years? How much greater could Marco van Basten have become? Perhaps nobody will ever know. But maybe that mystery became part of his legend. Because some footballers leave behind records. He left behind imagination. That is why Marco van Basten will always be remembered as a true footballing icon. Not simply because he scored amazing goals, but because he made football feel elegant, effortless, and unforgettable. What is your favorite memory of Marco van Basten? Let us know in the comments below. Some footballers dominate football through power, others through speed, others through statistics. But every generation produces one player who seems to play a completely different game from everybody else. A footballer who makes difficult things appear effortless. For many football lovers, that player was Michael Laudrup. To some, he was the greatest playmaker football has ever seen. To others, football's purest artist. And perhaps the most incredible thing about Michael Laudrup was how easy genius looked. Born in Copenhagen, Denmark, in 1964, football surrounded Michael from the beginning. His father, Finn Laudrup, had been an international footballer himself, and alongside his younger brother Brian Laudrup, football became part of everyday life. But even as a child, Michael played differently. He did not rush. He did not panic. Instead, he observed. And then suddenly, with one touch or one pass, he would destroy an entire defense. As Michael developed through Danish football, coaches quickly realized they were watching somebody special. Because while most players chased the ball, Laudrup understood space. He seemed capable of seeing movements before they happened. Very quickly, Europe noticed. Italian football during the 1980s was brutal, tactical, aggressive, relentless. And yet Michael Laudrup still found ways to glide through matches with elegance. His spells with Lazio and Juventus helped shape him. But perhaps Italy also taught him something important. That football could become too rigid, too mechanical. And Michael Laudrup was not built for mechanical football. He was built to create. That freedom finally arrived when he moved to Barcelona under the legendary Johan Cruyff. And together, they changed football forever. Cruyff's Barcelona dream team became one of football's most influential sides. Possession football, movement, creativity, intelligence, total football. And in the center of it all stood Michael Laudrup. Calm, elegant, untouchable. Some footballers demand attention. Laudrup never needed to. The ball naturally found him. And once it did, magic followed. No-look passes. Outside of the foot assists. Perfect through balls defenders could not understand until it was too late. At times, watching Michael Laudrup felt almost unfair. Because football looked easier for him than it did for everybody else. Former Barcelona manager Johan Cruyff once said, "Michael Laudrup was the best player in the world. Not one of the best. The best." And when a football visionary like Cruyff says something like that, people listen. At Barcelona, Laudrup helped deliver 4 consecutive La Liga titles and a European Cup. But trophies alone never explained his greatness. Because Michael Laudrup was remembered for beauty, for moments, for football supporters replayed in their minds for years afterward. One famous example came against Real Madrid. Laudrup received the ball near the edge of the box. Most players would have crossed immediately. Others might have shot. Instead, he paused, just for a second. And in that tiny moment, the entire defense froze. Then came the pass. Perfectly weighted. Perfectly timed. A pass that split defenders apart as though they were not even there. It became one of many moments that defined his genius. Because Laudrup's greatest weapon was never physical ability. It was awareness. Former teammate Pep Guardiola later admitted, "He was the best player I ever played with." Yet even among football royalty, Laudrup stood apart. Creative without becoming reckless. Elegant without losing effectiveness. That balance is incredibly rare. Then came one of football's most shocking transfers. In 1994, after disagreements with Cruyff, Michael Laudrup crossed football's impossible divide. He left Barcelona and joined their greatest rivals, Real Madrid. For Barcelona supporters, it felt like betrayal. For Madrid supporters, it felt unbelievable. But almost immediately, he transformed Real Madrid too. In his first season, Madrid won La Liga. That meant Michael Laudrup had now won 5 consecutive Spanish league titles. 4 with Barcelona. 1 with Madrid. And somehow, even after changing sides in football's fiercest rivalry, supporters from both clubs still respected him. Because genius transcends rivalry. For Denmark, Michael Laudrup became far more than a footballer. He became a symbol of elegance and national pride. And perhaps one of the most beautiful parts of his story was sharing football with his brother Brian. Together, the Laudrup brothers became football royalty in Denmark. Different styles, different personalities, yet both carried elegance. Watching them together for Denmark felt special, not simply because of their talent, but because there was visible understanding between them. And although Michael was often seen as the quieter genius, Brian once admitted something many supporters already believed. That Michael was the greatest player in the family. Even years after retirement, players and managers still speak about Laudrup with unusual admiration. Not because he was loud. Not because he chased attention. But because footballers recognized something extraordinary. A player capable of making impossible things feel natural. Modern football often celebrates noise. Michael Laudrup represented something quieter. A footballer devoted to the beauty of the game itself. Because statistics cannot fully capture artistry. You cannot calculate elegance. But the people who watched Michael Laudrup remember. They remember the impossible passes. The calmness. The grace. The intelligence. They remember football that felt effortless. That is why Michael Laudrup will always remain a true footballing icon. A player who turned passing into imagination. And football into something unforgettable. What is your favorite Michael Laudrup memory? Some footballers become famous. Some become legends. But only a handful become mythology. Diego Maradona became mythology. To millions of Argentinians, he was hope. To Naples, he was a savior. To football, he was genius. Born in Villa Fiorito, one of the poorest areas of Buenos Aires, Maradona grew up where opportunities were rare and dreams often felt impossible. Football became his escape, his language, his future. Even as a child, people knew they were seeing something different. The ball seemed attached to him. Defenders could not take it away. Crowds could not look away. By the age of 16, he was already playing professional football. And soon, Argentina fell in love. At Boca Juniors, he became a national hero. Not because he looked like a superstar, but because he looked like one of them. A boy from the streets carrying impossible dreams, and somehow making them real. But the world was waiting. A move to Europe followed. First came Barcelona. Yet injuries, illness, and controversy prevented him from fully conquering Spain. The football genius was obvious. The peace was not. Then came Naples. And everything changed. When Maradona joined Napoli in 1984, southern Italy was overlooked and mocked by the wealthy north. Napoli had never won a league title. Most expected nothing. Maradona expected everything. What happened next still feels impossible. He transformed Napoli from outsiders into champions. The city adored him. Murals appeared. Songs were written. Supporters treated him like a saint. Because for the first time, somebody had made them believe. What made Maradona different was not simply talent. Football has seen talented players before. What made Maradona different was responsibility. Wherever he went, people expected him to carry everything. At Napoli, he was expected to challenge the richest clubs in Italy. At Argentina, he was expected to carry a nation. And somehow, he often did. There are footballers who fit into great teams. Maradona became the team. Every attack seemed to begin with him. Every moment of hope seemed to pass through him. When supporters looked onto the pitch, they looked for one man. And that kind of pressure would crush most people. But for a while, Maradona seemed to thrive on it. Former Napoli teammate Ciro Ferrara once spoke about the belief Maradona gave to everyone around him. Not tactics. Not speeches. Belief. Because when Diego was on the pitch, impossible things suddenly felt possible. That belief transformed Naples. Before Maradona, Napoli dreamed. After Maradona, Napoli expected miracles. And somehow, he delivered them. The city had spent generations living in the shadow of the powerful clubs from northern Italy. Then came a young Argentine carrying the hopes of millions on his shoulders. For many supporters, he was more than a footballer. He became a symbol of defiance, a symbol of pride, a symbol of possibility. Even today, decades later, murals of Maradona cover Naples. Not because of statistics. Not because of trophies, but because of what he made people feel. Then came 1986. The tournament that turned greatness into immortality. The World Cup in Mexico. Argentina against England. 4 years after the Falklands War. The tension was enormous. And Maradona produced football's most famous match. First came the hand of God. A goal surrounded by controversy. Then came something entirely different. 4 minutes later, Maradona picked up the ball in his own half. He ran. Past one player. Then another. Then another. And another. The world watched in disbelief. When the ball hit the net, football history changed forever. The goal of the century. One match. One player. 2 moments. One controversial. One beautiful. Both unforgettable. And perhaps that was Maradona. Genius and chaos. Beauty and controversy. Good and bad. Impossible to separate. Argentina won the World Cup. Maradona carried them there. Not alongside greatness. He was the greatness. Former England striker Gary Lineker once described him as the greatest player I ever saw. And millions agreed. But greatness often comes with a price. As fame grew, so did the pressure. As adoration grew, so did the scrutiny. The same man who carried cities and countries also carried enormous personal struggles. Controversies followed. Suspensions followed. Mistakes followed. The football became complicated. But perhaps that is why Maradona remains such a powerful figure. Because he never felt perfect. He felt human, flawed, brilliant, vulnerable. Across his career, Maradona scored more than 340 goals, won league titles in Argentina and Italy, lifted the World Cup, and transformed Napoli forever. Yet statistics alone cannot explain Diego Maradona. Because Maradona was emotion. He made supporters dream. He made them believe. He made football feel larger than life. Even today, murals still cover walls in Naples. Children still wear his shirt. Supporters still tell stories. Because legends are remembered. Myths are retold. And few footballers have ever felt more mythical than Diego Maradona. That is why Diego Maradona will always remain a true footballing icon. Not simply because he won. Not simply because he dazzled. But because he carried the hopes of millions and made the impossible feel possible. If you enjoyed this episode of True Footballing Icons, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe or follow so you never miss another legendary football story. What is your favorite memory of Diego Maradona? And is he the greatest of all time?